All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Keene with the New York Stem Cell Foundation Research Institute. Welcome to our virtual classroom. We are excited to have you join us today to learn all about stem cells and becoming a scientist. We would also like to take a moment to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making today's event possible and for their support of our educational events. The New York Stem Cell Foundation Research Institute, or NYSCF, as we like to call it, and you'll hear throughout today, is located in New York City. At NYSCF, we study human stem cells in many ways to help us better understand and treat different diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, diabetes, and many more. I have three of my amazing friends and colleagues with us today who are very excited to teach you new things. But before we get started, I wanted to give a few quick reminders. You are automatically muted and your camera is off. If you are having any problems with the webinar, please let us know in the chat and we'll try to resolve those as fast as possible. We love questions. Please submit your questions through the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. I will also turn on the raise hand function during the Q&A, so you won't see it just yet. So if you'd like to ask a question out loud, please just raise your hand and we'll try to get you unmuted. We do have a lot of students joining us today, so we will try to get to as many questions as possible and answer all of your pressing questions. NYSCF's virtual classroom is being recorded, so you will be able to share it later with friends, family, and classmates, so we'll make sure we send that to you. Now I am excited to introduce Dr. Daniel Paull, NYSCF's Senior Vice President of Discovery and Platform Development, who is going to teach you all about stem cells. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Paull.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so as Ali said, my name is Daniel. I head up a platform here that we'll tell you a little bit about this afternoon, but conduct most of the research that we do using robots, and we'll get to show you those later. And really, we're looking for new ways to detect and understand and treat various different diseases. And as you can probably tell from my voice, I'm originally from England, but have been here a little bit over 10 years, and it's been quite an adventure. So let's tell you a little bit about stem cells and sort of set the stage for today. But before we get to stem cells, we're actually going to start with cake and bread. And so if you think about these two seemingly very different things, how would you go about making this? Most likely you're going to look up a recipe, and it might be inside a recipe book. And although they're two very, very different things, there are some things in the recipe that are quite the same. So for example, both maybe need some butter, both need maybe some flour, but then to get each kind of different cake, you need some very distinct different ingredients. And so you have to follow this recipe pretty carefully. And if you do that, you'll get either a cake or a loaf of bread come out at the end of it. And so, as I said, everything exists and you follow this recipe and you follow the ingredients. And it's really important that when you're following the recipe, you get the ingredients correct. And so if I was to get something wrong in trying to make a loaf of bread like this, for example, and instead of putting just one packet of yeast in here, I put 2 packets of yeast, I could get a very bad outcome. And I may end up with a big mess like this. And I started with a recipe and sort of started on this because inside our bodies are basically recipe books, and they provide all of the instructions and sort of help us make the ingredients for everything about us. And so, for example, in this little cartoon here, this particular person here, he's a man because of a set of instructions. He might have brown hair because of certain things. He might have orange hair or ginger hair, or he might have curly hair and have glasses. And the reasons for this, or at least some of them, exist because of the instructions that exist within his body. And so if you zoom in and you keep zooming in, eventually you'll realize that your entire body is made up of these things. And you can just begin to see it appear here. And this is a particular kind of cell. And so here it appears here. And the cell, there are many of these in our body, and they contain various different bits and pieces, but importantly, they contain the recipe book. And it's the recipe book, as I said, that provides the instructions for how the cell behaves and ultimately makes us us. And so if we open it up just to the chat for a second, I wonder if anybody can guess how many cells exist within your body. See if this works. If not, I'll just tell you all the answer in a second. All right, we got 1 trillion, we've got 8,000. The real answer is 35 trillion cells, which is just a staggeringly large number of cells. And they all serve slightly different roles. We obviously have some cells that exist on our skin, but we have a number of others, and they all do different jobs within our body. And the reason that the cells do different jobs, like we've said all along so far, is because of DNA. And the DNA is the recipe, has the recipes that allow the cell to do its job. And DNA is inside these things called chromosomes, and this exists within each and every cell within the body. And as I said, there's many different kinds of cells. We have cells that exist in your blood and carry oxygen all around your body. We have cells that exist within fat, and there are cells existing there. We have cells that exist within places like your liver, and we have cells that help fight bacteria and viruses. And so are very obviously important at the moment when we think of things like coronavirus. And so our immune system contains lots of different cells that help fight off different diseases. The cell that we're interested in here, though, is a very, very particular special kind of cell. And it's something called a pluripotent stem cell. And that word basically means that this one particular kind of cell can make every other cell in the body. So for example, a blood cell that's floating around in our blood system, it can't turn into a brain cell, or a cell that's inside our muscle can't become an eye cell, for example. But these pluripotent stem cells can become every single type of cell that you could possibly think of. And as we've said, cells make up all the different parts of our body, so brain cells and heart cells, skin cells, and things like beta cells, which get damaged during diseases like diabetes. And all of them have originally come from these kinds of stem cells. And so these stem cells, these particular ones I'm talking about here, don't exist in your body anymore. You have some kinds of cells, some kinds of stem cells, they might exist in your muscle, but they can only become other types of muscle cells. These pluripotent stem cells only existed for a very brief period of time before becoming these very specialist types of cells. However, a few years ago, a very, very clever scientist came up with a technique, and it allows us to take blood cells or skin cells, just like the ones covering your body, and we can magically, scientifically, turn them back into stem cells. And this allows us to have these cells that we can then turn, as a scientist, into any cell that we would like to in a dish. And so I'll show you what that means. So does anybody want to try and guess, if we turn the chat on again, what kind of cell this might be? Let's see if we get any replies. Does anybody want to try and guess what type of cell this is? We've got neurons. Let's see if we get one or two more. Heart cells. All right, this actually is what your skin looks like. This is a type of skin cell called a fibroblast, and it exists all over your body. And it's these cells that we can grow lots of and turn them basically back in time into a stem cell. And this is what a stem cell looks like. We can make our cells glow different colors, but each of the different dots here is basically representing a different cell in this dish. And they grow in these sorts of clusters, and this is what a stem cell looks like. And with these stem cells, we can then take these and look at different diseases. So for example, if I've taken a little bit of blood or a little bit of skin from someone that has something like diabetes or a different kind of brain disease or a heart disease, I can just take a little bit of their skin, but actually then grow from that the cells relevant for that disease. So I could grow some heart cells or some brain cells. And so at NYSCF here, we study all different kinds of diseases. We study things you might have heard of, like Alzheimer's or dementia. things like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis. These are things you might have heard of. We have a team that works here on cancer, in particular women's cancer, a team that works on diabetes, a team that's growing bone. They actually grow pieces of bone from stem cells. We have various teams working on different eye diseases, and we study a whole lot of different rare diseases as well, diseases that affect maybe 1 in a million people or more. And so it allows us, like I said, we can take these pluripotent stem cells and turn them into these. These are sort of baby neurons, if you like, here. And if we grow them long enough, they can turn into really great neurons like this. And these are just like the ones you find in your brain. Except, of course, if I want to study a brain disease, I can't just go into someone's brain and take their cells out. So this allows me a really good way to look at the kinds of cells that might exist in that person. We can also grow heart cells. And so here, for example, you can see this heart cell beating away here. And sometimes we can get them to grow as big sheets as well. So you can see this whole sheet is rippling away. And if you think about when it's late at night and you hear a loud noise, sometimes your heart starts beating much faster. We can do the same thing basically to these cells. Your heart starts beating faster because of a chemical in your body, and it allows us to grow those cells. And so one of the things we're very interested in here, and why we work, as you'll see in a second, with robots, is that diseases affect different people in different ways. Not everybody gets the same disease. And then maybe more importantly as well, when people then take a medicine, some medicines work for some people, but not for everybody. And so for a long time, we've been interested in these sorts of questions. Why do only some people get a particular disease? And why don't medicines work for everybody? And so when we're in the dish, and you're going to hear more about this from my friend Camille in a second, when you're growing stem cells, it's a lot of hard work. So what my friend here is doing is he's pipetting cells, and he's moving them around from one tube to another. And it takes quite a long time, and he's got this giant dish of plates to work through. And the cells are growing on the bottom of these dishes, but it takes a lot of work to be able to do this. And so a few years ago, we embarked on finding a way to do this in a slightly different way. And so we brought together all of these different robots here in the lab. And what that allows us to do is look at the cells from not just one person or two people at the same time, but in fact, tens to hundreds and maybe thousands of people at the same time. And so the robot does exactly the same thing that you just saw my friend doing a second ago, but it also has microscopes and it can take pictures. So when I'm at home asleep in the evening, the robot is still working and still taking pictures for me. And just like in our bodies is 37 degrees Celsius, so are the houses that these cells live in. And so we can very, very carefully control how we grow these cells. And so ultimately, we can either find new medicines by looking at how these cells are behaving, or maybe we can think about finding ways to make the cells that our body can't replace by itself. So like your skin changes a lot as you every day, basically, you grow new skin cells, even though you don't notice it. But if you have some damage to maybe your heart or your brain cells as you get older, sometimes the body can't always repair itself. So maybe we can come up with ways to grow enough of these cells to put them back into the body. And so one example of that is in a particular kind of eye disease that people get when they get much, much older. So not nearly as young as you are now, but when you're much, much older. Some people, if we look at this road here, it looks really beautiful. But as some people get older, eventually it gets harder and harder for them to see straight ahead. And they end up with these black patches basically in front of their eye. And this is a disease that we call macular degeneration. And that's a big fancy word, but it basically affects a very particular type of cell at the back of the eye. And it's the reason why when you look at your eye, you can see it's black, is basically because of the black cells that are at the back of your eye. And when you lose those, you lose the ability to see properly. But one of the things that we can do here is grow those cells and grow lots and lots of them. And so already there have been some people who have had cells grown in the dish and put back into their eyes to try and stop their blindness getting worse. And here at NYSCF, we're just embarking on our own adventure into this space and beginning to grow these cells that will one day go back into people as well. And so it's eyes today, but who knows what we might be able to do tomorrow? Maybe it'll be liver cells or bone cells or heart cells or blood that were growing in the dish, and one day can go back into people that need it to make themselves get better. So I'm very happy to open it up to any questions that we have.
Thank you, Dr. Paull. We have lots of questions, so I'm going to get right into it.
Sure.
And for anyone that would like to submit a question, you can either raise your hand using the little icon at the bottom of your screen that looks like a hand, where I will unmute you, or you can submit them right through the Q&A chat. So my first question is, you showed lots of pretty cells in your presentation. Are they that colorful in our body?
No, unfortunately not. Most things are actually just kind of, they'll look pretty much black and white. But we have these special tricks that we can do to make the cells glow particular colors. And that's really important for us because we maybe want to be able to identify particular cells that we're growing at any given time. So that's kind of one of the fun things we get to do as a scientist, is take these pretty pictures using these special tools that we have.
Cool. You talked about diseases too, and a little bit about this, but how do we get a disease in the first place?
Yeah, sure. And so I was touching on that and sort of, yeah, sorry for not coming back to that, but sort of in that recipe book that exists within our cells, inside our DNA, it is sometimes the DNA, like I showed you with the loaf of bread, the wrong amount gets made, or not enough of something gets added into a recipe. And our cells can sometimes do the same thing because there could be something wrong in the recipe book, and we might call that a mutation in your DNA. Sometimes the body can't make enough of something, or it makes too much of something, and that can lead to some people getting a disease. Sometimes that just happens as we get older as well. Our bodies have to constantly basically keep creating that recipe book. Every time a new cell is made, it makes a copy of the recipe book. And sometimes a mistake happens. And so that's how some people end up with diseases.
Thank you. And if you cure a disease in the lab, does that mean that you cured it in people too?
Not quite, though we hope we might. So it takes a long time to find a new medicine. It can take maybe 10 years, and it can take maybe $1 billion to find a new medicine. But if we can find something that's working on the cells in the lab here, it's very possible that one day that might become a medicine for you. And one of the very important things to note is that most medicines today aren't made always with human cells. So sometimes they use mouse cells, or sometimes they use other kinds of animals. And obviously an animal isn't the same as us. An animal is not a human being. A mouse isn't a human being. And so we hope that being able to use human cells like we are, that we can actually find drugs a lot faster, and drugs that might, medicines that might actually be a lot better as well.
Great. And I have a question here from Envy. Do your heart cells beat along with your heart?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the heart cells just beat by themselves. They have an intrinsic property that allows them to beat. And so the reason why your heart is beating is because the cells are wanting to beat by themselves, and they all work in coordination. And Cecile, a friend of mine, Cecile, who's going to talk in a moment, may touch on this, but these cells have this intrinsic ability that allows them to beat. And so just like they do in the dish, I'm not doing anything to make those beat apart from growing them. They do the same thing in your body.
Great. Can you grow skin cells?
Yeah, we can. So if I take a little bit of skin from me now, and it might only be a tiny piece, like the size of maybe an apple seed, very, very small piece of skin, I can grow cells from that. And that's how I get the cells that I can turn back into a stem cell. But we can also turn stem cells back into skin cells as well, if we want to kind of try and make even more of them. So there's lots of ways to grow skin cells, absolutely.
Cool. I have a question from Sydney. How do you put the cells into a patient if you're going to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, Camille will touch on this, because although I'm talking to you right now, it takes a whole team of people to be able to do the kind of work we're doing. And when we think about putting cells back into the body, probably that's going to require an operation. So to put the cells back into the eye, that requires an operation and a surgeon and a doctor. And so very early on in the process, even maybe before we can even make the cells, we ask ourselves, you know, if we could make them, how could we put them back in? And so we work with doctors and maybe engineers to come up with devices that will allow us to put the cells back into the body. Sometimes it might ultimately be a little bit like a transplant. You think about people having kidney transplants. Maybe it'll be a little bit like that one day. At the moment, it might be that we put the cells on a little patch, and that gets put into the body as well. So it requires a team effort to be able to do this kind of work.
Lots of people involved.
Lots of people.
We have a question from Sky. Do your brain cells control your other cells?
That's a really good question too. They control they work together to coordinate the way your cells are working. So if you think about raising my arm, if I'm lifting my arm or speaking right now, my brain is helping coordinate that by different cells in my brain working together and sending signals through nerves. And again, Cecile will talk about this in a second, sending signals to the different parts of my body to do those kinds of things. So yeah, everything kind of has to work together to be able to do its job.
Great. I'm going to ask one last question. There's two questions, but I'm going to save one for my colleague that's later on. But
sure.
Who builds the robots that we have?
So we work with all sorts of different companies. So there are lots of companies that build robots, but you'll hear about it again in a second, that it's not just building the robots, it takes a whole team of people to program them and to test them. And so we're very, very fortunate here that we have some terrific programmers and we have some terrific engineers who all work together to kind of make these robots do what we want them to do.
Cool. Well, thank you. I know there's some more questions coming in, but we're going to save them for my colleagues, or we'll get to them at the end. So thank you again, Dr. Paull.
Sure.
As I mentioned, if you have any questions more for him, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Now I'm happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Camille Fulmore, a scientist at the NYSCF Research Institute. Camille is going to tell you all about what it's like being a scientist in real life and how to become one in the future. So I'll hand it over to you, Camille.
Okay, guys, I just kind of wanted to talk to you all about my journey and how I ended up here at NYSCF and my pathway leading me into sciences. So I was originally born in Orlando, Florida in 1990, and I kind of always knew I wanted to explore the world around me. I actually always had dreams of wanting to be the first woman on Mars, and I just truly felt like space was the area of exploration where I would find the most answers about the world. And so that kind of led me to UCF, University of Central Florida, in 2008, where I did my undergrad. Originally, I majored in physics with a specialization in astronomy for my first 3 years. But then I kind of found that the work I was doing, I wasn't sure if I would be able to get gratification and apply the things that I was finding to help humanity overall. And so I switched my major then to biomedical sciences and biotechnology, but I still really wasn't sure what type of science I wanted to be involved in. I knew that I just loved exploration and I wanted to use my imagination and my job. So then I decided to go ahead and pursue my master's degree from New York University. And after I graduated, or while I was in school pursuing my master's, I was first introduced to stem cell research and stem cell therapy. And I wasn't sure the best avenue to pursue any experience in a lab or just get more hands-on research as well. And so I decided to email a bunch of different labs in New York City who were studying stem cells. And then I first found my first mentor at the Stem Cell Core at Columbia University. And then I just kind of fell in love with stem cells after that. From there, working at Columbia's Medical Center, I also worked at the New York State Psychiatric Institute and the Research Foundation of Mental Hygiene, where I did a lot of neuroscience research studying neurodegenerative diseases, depression, and we mostly looked at aging and neurogenesis patterns within the hippocampus of postmortem human brain tissue. and kind of looked at people's lifestyles and the way that they died in order to see if we could correlate some of those patterns to their lifestyle and as well. And from there is where I ended up at NYSCF. So now I'm at the New York Stem Cell Foundation, and I'll tell you guys a little bit more about what I do here. And then eventually, once in a couple months, I'm actually leaving to pursue my PhD in molecular and cell biology as well. So why do we study stem cells in the first place? And the motivation behind a lot of what we do here is that a lot of diseases in our society can't effectively be treated. We've spent 98 years with insulin therapy for diabetes, just so people can maintain their lifestyle, but not to rid them of diabetes. And a lot of cancer patients don't actually respond to standard treatments as well. And we still haven't found any disease-modifying therapies for a lot of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And so we currently use a lot of different model organisms to study diseases. We use fruit flies, we use zebrafish, we use mice, and we use worms. And a lot of these organisms are surprisingly similar to the body or to the human body in a lot more ways than we've realized. And while there have been countless scientific breakthroughs made through studying these model organisms, these models can only mimic disease because none of these organisms are actually people. And we just can't treat what we don't understand. So this central issue goes back to a point that Dan was saying. We just can't like cut open a body just to look at cells or just to examine a disease or anything. And so in order to actually look at the cells for these diseases we need to study, we need a way to examine them outside of the body. And like Dan was saying before, all of the cells in our body come from stem cells. The body's made up of over 200 different types of cells that are specialized to perform all different types of functions. We start off from this little cell that then forms a cell called a blastocyst. And within that blastocyst, there's something called an inner cell mass. And that inner cell mass contains all of those ingredients or the recipe that's used to make a full human body. And so some of these qualities of stem cells actually make them superheroes of the body. Not only are these cells able to self-renew and differentiate, we can make them in limited supplies within our body. And we can make any type of cell from the stem cell. Stem cells are ultimately a window into disease because they allow us to look at different parts of the body that are affected. And we're also able to see how not only the shapes of the cells are affected, but how the DNA within those cells and within those specific diseases can change over time. Stem cells are really revolutionizing biomedical research, and studying and treating human diseases with these stem cells, they're essentially avatars because they give us a window to look inside this certain person's cells without actually having to look inside the person. And one of the things that we do best with stem cells is drug discovery. So stem cells can also help us discover medicines that are more likely to be safe and effective in humans. We can actually try out to see if a drug will have a positive or negative effect on a person before we actually put this drug or this medicine into the person's body. And so here's an example, just like Dan was saying before, of the beating cardiomyocytes and the muscle cells of the heart. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in men and women in America, but a lot of medications actually have cardiotoxic effects. And so that means these medicines can cause the heartbeat to beat irregularly or have something called an arrhythmia for certain types of people. But we can then use patients' stem cells, turn these cells into heart cells, and test these medications on the cells to see if they have any impact on that person or if they're cardiotoxic. And so we also use stem cells to create different therapies. And a lot of diseases are caused by the death or malfunction of a specific cell type. So how can we fix these cells? we can then use the stem cells to make this cell type that's affected, or misbehaving in the patient, and replace it with a cell that's properly behaving or properly serving its function. And so this is kind of what we're doing right now with our GMP suite to produce the retinal pigmented epithelial cells for that disease that causes vision loss that Dan was talking about before. So with our retinal pigmented epithelial cells, we're able to take a patient's cells, differentiate them back and into an RPE that's positively behaving using gene editing techniques, and then put that back into the patient so that they can see better. Currently, macular degeneration is a leading cause of blindness in the world, and it affects tons of people throughout the US. And the therapies that we're using here, hopefully will be able to input back into the patients to give them that ability to see again. But because diseases affect so many people differently and medicines affect people differently, we need stem cells from tons of different people in order to reach a general consensus of how we should treat these patients and how we should tackle a certain disease. And so like Dan was saying before, stem cell research is actually a lot of hard work, and we're constantly using our hands to deal with cells, but humans aren't perfect. And while we may have a greater amount of precision, we also have significantly more variability. And I may handle cells differently than my coworker may handle cells. I also might handle cells earlier in the day differently than I would in the afternoon. So to kind of normalize that, and for us to be able to see the most consistent and reliable outcome at the end, we use robotics. And with these robotics, like Dan was saying, it allows us to do so much research and look at so many cells all the time. And while these robots are doing this work, it also gives us more time to analyze our results and go through and find out the outcome and see, at least take us to the stage where we need to make a benefit in the patient. But what this robot is doing is just a piece of what we do at NYSCF. And here, the global stem cell array actually takes a lot of scientists to run it. And so we have a team of biologists, automation engineers, data scientists, and software engineers that all work together to help run the array and keep things moving and make science happen. The biologists work with examining the cells, and we have automation engineers that are also responsible for working with the mechanics and the robotics of the machinery, doing the robots. What we normally do by hand, we can tell these automation engineers to program for the robots to do in an automated fashion. And then we have data scientists as well, because while robots can interpret data, it does need a human's eye as well for that extra form of validity. And we also have software engineers also, and the software engineers kind of help keep all of the systems running in working order. In order to interact with these robots, we have to use a lot of codes as well and feed these inputs into the machine, and that's where our software engineers come into play. But these are just some of the options and scientists that we have on the array. There are actually tons of career options in science, and these roles might have different requirements depending on if you're in academia or if you decide to go to industry. So if you decide to stay teaching at a university or maybe go into some other type of pharmaceutical industry or nonprofit organization as well. So you have the option of pursuing a bachelor's degree as well, which tends to be about 4 years of schooling or 4 years of college, and that will open the door for you for a lot of different fields in science. And you also have the option, if you figure out something in science you like, you can specialize a little bit further and go ahead and pursue a master's degree, which is about an additional 2 years of schooling after that. And even if you still wanted to maybe become a university professor or PI or go through a postdoc, then you also always have the option of pursuing your PhD as well at a university. And even if you decide to go become a medical doctor or an MD, medical doctors still have the option to teach, and often medical doctors can also be PIs. And you even have the option to pursue an MD PhD as well, which would allow you to have a private practice as well as doing research. And I just kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of tips of advice, just some things that I wish people had told me when I first got involved in the sciences. Get involved at your school and always stay in touch with your teachers. The connections that you make are so fundamental, and you'd be surprised at how small the science community really is and how supportive people are once you start talking to them about your dreams and your passions. Take every opportunity you have to gain experience, especially as a student. Like, people just love to teach students, and the opportunities are truly endless. Even if it's an experience that you're not too sure about, it's equally as important to figure out what you don't like as what you do. So just make sure you stay open to those new experiences. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, and that's honestly what science is. Here, we truly embrace our mistakes. With every mistake, it's truly an opportunity to learn, and you just have to keep that perspective about the situation. Also, don't be afraid to ask for help. It costs way less to fix it costs way less to ask a question than to fix a mistake. And everybody's more willing to help. There's no such thing as a dumb question in science. And I guarantee you, oftentimes everybody's probably thought what you want to ask. Also, find a mentor. Find somebody that you look up to, find somebody that you respect, somebody that you trust, and will have your best interest in mind. Somebody that's supportive of your ideas, of your passions, whether it's like a family member, somebody at your school, even a friend, just anybody you look up to for advice. Establishing that relationship early on is so important in your future. And never feel limited or intimidated by a job description. Job descriptions are just a baseline, and jobs usually don't expect everybody to know everything from the first day. So never let that be a limiting factor in any career choice you make in the future. And also know your worth and trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right in a situation, then it probably doesn't, and that's okay. And never stop learning. Stay curious, because that's truly what science is all about. So let's talk science for a second. Here's some food for thought. With artificial intelligence, and when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're referring to the ability of a computer or some type of technology to perform tasks in a way that would normally be performed by a human. So how can this be used with stem cells? Does anybody have any ideas? Feel free to put them in the chat. Okay. So how we use artificial intelligence at NYSCF is actually for drug discovery. We're actually working with a large machine learning project with Google, and machine learning, it just involves essentially, at least with respect to this project, we have cells or fibroblasts or skin cells that we've taken from healthy people, and then we have cells that we've taken from patients who have a particular disease. And so we feed hundreds and thousands of images of these cells as they're developing over time into different machines, so they can essentially learn what a disease cell looks like or learn what a healthy cell looks like. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to take a patient's cells, put them in a machine, and the robot will be able to tell us if this particular person's cells are looking like a particular disease or not, or if they're healthy. And we can also be able to test and see if a medication is making a patient's cells change into a healthier patient's cells as well. Stem cells are ultimately the future of medicine, and it's the foundation of what we do here at NYSCF. Just studying and treating your disease with your own stem cells can be used for drug discovery, cell replacement therapy, and studying diseases overall. So I just wanted to thank everybody today for coming, and the scientists and the engineers here at NYSCF.
Thanks, Camille. That's very exciting. So everyone, as you can see, stem cells have a lot of potential. So Camille, I'm going to ask one or two questions just so we have time for Cecile's presentation. So this is a question from Alex. What happens if you combined a rat cell and a human cell and put it back into the body?
If we put it back into a human body or a rat body?
Back into a human body, and it's, you know, just curious questions we have.
Sure. So we could put it into a rat body, but if we put it back into a human body, then there will more than likely be an immune response from the human that will probably attack that cell as a foreign entity. But oftentimes we are able to actually put human cells into mice as well. So a lot of times we use mice called skid mice, which are mice that are immunocompromised or don't have an immune system. So it allows us to grow human cells within these animals, and those cells won't be rejected by their system. But we can't turn off an immune system of a person.
And we wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Let me just look. I have a question from Sydney. How do brain cells control your body? How are they so smart?
So the brain cells, there are actually tons of brain cells that make up the brain. We have oligodendrocytes, glial cells, microglia, neurons, and all of these cells communicate to each other in the brain using something called synapses and electric potential. And so all of these cells, well, just by pulses of electricity is essentially how the cells communicate to each other in your brain. They receive a command from somewhere else in your body and then give a response to perform an action.
Very cool. So I know we have some more questions. So Camille's going to stick around. If we have some extra time at the end, we'll come back to her. So thank you so much, Camille, for teaching us all about what you do at NYSCF and your future path. And we wish you best of luck at your PhD. As I mentioned, if you have any more questions, feel free to pass them over in the chat. Finally, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Cecile Terrenoire, NYSCF Senior Director of Process Development. Dr. Terrenoire is going to explain how electricity is used by how our cells use electricity in our body. So Cecile, turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to tell you about the electricity that you have in your body and that everybody has in their body. So we all have, I'm sorry about that. We all have batteries in our body. We have a battery in our heart and we have a battery in our brain. The battery in the heart, that's what makes the heart beat. And the battery in the brain, that's what makes the brain think. And to charge the batteries, what we do is we need to eat fruits and vegetables. So every time you eat fruits, for instance, an apple, you're going to chew the apple and you have pieces of apples that will get to your stomach. And once they get to your stomach, they're going to get broken down into smaller pieces. And some of those very small pieces are called minerals. They look like teeny tiny beads that contain electricity. And that's how we charge our batteries. But the batteries we have in our brain, they actually, you heard Dan and Camille tell you about this. This is how they look like. This is a brain cell, or we also call that a neuron. And we have a lot of them in our head. And so I'm going to show you what happens when those batteries are charged and when you keep them charged, because it's important to keep them charged. So imagine this is your brain, and we're going to look inside the brain. And this is happening right now in your head. You have all those small batteries, those small brain cells that are sending electricity to each other. So you see a purple lightning bolt that goes from one cell to another. That's actually the way the cells are talking to each other. And that's what happens when you think, actually. This is happening right now in your head. So you see here, you have two cells that are brain cells that are talking to each other. But not only we have batteries in our head, in the brain, we also have, oops, I'm sorry about that. We also have, so this is your brain, you also have a lot of electrical cables, and you can see them here in yellow. They go everywhere in your body, and they connect your brain to your body. The reason why you have all those cables is because the brain is like a command center. It always needs to know what's happening around you and inside your body. So for instance, when you hear some music, when you watch a movie, when you smell perfume, if you eat an apple, you taste the apple. All these signals, you can feel them because you have electricity that goes from your ear to your brain, or your eyes to your brain, all those different parts of your body to your brain. And it's like if those different organs were sending a text message to the brain saying, for instance, if it's the ear, oh, you know what, right now I'm listening to some music, it's pretty cool. Or if you're watching a movie, the eyes are going to send a text message to the brain to tell the brain about this great movie they're watching. And then you also have electrical cables that connect the brain to the organs, so what you have inside your body. And that's something important because your brain wants to make sure that you're going to be healthy and safe, that you don't feel any pain. If you feel pain, for instance, in your stomach because you ate something bad, you cannot see your stomach, so you don't know. Technically, you don't know that it's not doing well, but you feel the pain though, and you feel the pain because there's an electrical cable that connects your stomach to your brain, and that your stomach is sending this text message to your brain saying, you know what, I'm in pain right now. And you also have cables that are connecting your brain to your muscles. So that's the way your brain is ordering your muscles to move. So if you look at my hand now, the reason why I can do this, moving up and down, that's because my brain is sending electricity down my arm in an electrical cable, and is controlling the muscles of my hand and asking them to move like this. So it's actually really, really important that you have electricity in your body. Now, what happens if you don't have electricity in your body? Well, then you're going to have a lot of problems. If you cut that little electrical cable that you have between your ears and your brain, you won't be able to hear anything. You'll be deaf. If you cut the cable between your eyes and your brain, you won't be able to see anything. You'll be blind. If you cut the cable you have between your tongue and your brain, you won't be able to taste the difference between a cheeseburger or an ice cream. And if you cut the cable between your brain and your muscles, well, you won't be able to move your muscles. So if I cut the cable here between my hand and my brain, even if my brain asks my hand to move like this, I won't be able to do it. And this is what's happening here with this man. He's in a wheelchair because the cable between the muscles of his legs and his brain has been cut. So he's paralyzed. There are also other times when the electricity is important. It's important. It allows you to feel pain. So nobody likes to feel pain, but it's actually an information that's important for the brain to have. So imagine you have a tooth that's painful. The reason why you feel the pain is because the tooth is sending a text message to the brain using that electrical cable to tell the brain, I'm not feeling well. And then the brain is going to think, so you have all the brain cells that are going to talk to each other, and they're going to probably decide, you know what, you should probably go to the dentist before it gets worse. So feeling pain in this regard is actually a good thing because it's going to make you go and see a doctor before everything, your problem gets worse. There are also other circumstances where you can feel pain. Imagine that you have an encounter in the nature with one of those like very scary animals, like the very poisonous snake or a scorpion or a spider or a fugu fish. If they bite you or if they sting you, first of all, say on your hand, you're going to feel pain, but also maybe after a while, you're going to feel numb, and then maybe you will be paralyzed. You won't be able to move your head anymore. And that's because, if we take the snake, in the venom of the snake, there's a little chemical that's acting like if it was a teeny tiny scissors that are cutting the cables that connect your hand to your brain. So your brain is not able anymore to move your hand as it wants to do, just because those cables are cut. There are also circumstances where the electricity in your body can change, and that happens when you have a disease. If you have a brain disease, if you have a heart disease, the electricity is going to change in your brain or in your heart. So what we do at NYSCF, and Dan and Camille told you about that, we use stem cells to try to understand what causes the disease, and so we use those stem cells that Dan was talking about, and we can turn them into brain cells. And so we can have like here a mini brain in this dish, and it's so small that imagine it's in a dish like this. It's so small that I cannot see with my eyes that brain. So I need to have like a big loop, a big magnifying lens to look at it like this. And so except instead of using this, we use something more sophisticated. We use a microscope. And when we look at those cells under the microscope, this is how they look like. You have those, they look, all gray, dark gray or light gray. So every round thing that's inside that red circle, that's a cell, that's a brain cell. And then you have those very thin black lines that connect each circle to each other. These are the electrical cables. That's what the cells are using to talk to each other. So once we have those cells like that in a dish, we use special instruments to try to listen to them when they're talking to each other. So we're going to turn off the light in the room, and then we use a special camera to look at how those cells are talking to each other. So just to, I'm going to show you a video here. So in each red circle, there's one cell here, there's one cell here, like each of those red circles has one cell inside. And when it's very dark inside the circle, it means the cell is quiet. And when you see some green inside the circle, it means the cell is talking. And you're going to see what happens when in a normal brain, what happens? You see those little lights appearing here and there. These are cells that are, when they become green, they talk to the next cells and they're talking to each other. So apparently they have like interesting story to talk about. So that's happening in your brain right now, in a normal brain. But then if we were to do that with a brain from someone who has a disease, and Dan was talking about that, when we can at NYSCF we study, for instance, Alzheimer's disease or dementia or Parkinson's disease. So if you look at the video here, you'll see how often or not often the cells talk to each other. They actually don't like talking to each other. There's one here that's talking, another one down here that's talking once in a while, but they don't really like it. And it's just like the same for you. Like when you're really sick, you just want to go to bed and you want to sleep. You don't want to talk. And it's the same for the cells in the dish like that. And so we use this technique that we call electrophysiology to listen to the cells talk to each other and to try to understand why some cells are sick and why others are not sick. And we can do the same with heart cells. So we can use stem cells to make a tiny heart in a dish. And when you look at it on the microscope, this is how it looks like. So you have this thing it's like a mini heart that's beating. It's beating because it has a battery inside that sends electricity in all the cells that are making this heart. And its function of the heart, because it's a muscle, it's to beat like that. So that's what happens with a healthy heart. And then we can do the same with the heart that's coming from stem cells from a patient who has a heart disease. And so when we are turning the light off in the room and we want to look at how the cells are talking to each other in this heart, this is what happens. So remember, when they are green, it means that they're talking to each other. And when they are dark blue, dark purple, or black, it means they're not talking to each other. So you will see that as the heart is beating, the bottom of the heart, you see all the cells are talking to each other, so they're doing fine. But the top part of the heart here is remaining, very dark. The cells don't talk to each other, and that's not normal. Everything should be, all the cells, if they were healthy, should be talking to each other. So when we do those experiments, that's how we can learn about what causes the disease and what's happening. And once we understand why there's what is causing a disease, why a person is sick, then we can go to the next step, which is to try to find a treatment that will cure the disease of this patient. And so this is one of the many things that we are doing at NYSCF. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecile. This is all very cool. We have a lot of great questions. So I'm going to start asking them. So Alex asks, can you reconnect the cables? So when you mentioned that when a cable gets disconnected for someone who's maybe paralyzed, that they can no longer move around, can we reconnect those cables?
Sometimes, it depends. So sometimes you hear about maybe people having a car accident and maybe for some time they become, a little bit paralyzed, they cannot walk, but then they're going to go and do a lot of physical therapy and a lot of exercises that are going to stimulate their body and try to make it recover from the injury. And so it's going to take time. Sometimes it's not possible. It depends on what kind of cables are being cut. Some cables are very big, and if they're cut, you cannot replace them, but some other cables are maybe a little smaller in size, and those ones are more likely to be to regrow basically and to be replaced.
Thanks. We have a question, an anonymous question. Do we have tongue cells?
Do we have what?
Tongue cells.
Tongue cells, yes.
This was a question actually asked when someone was registering. How come when I touch the car sometimes it electrifies my hand when you get a shock when you touch a car?
So that's because you have, so it depends on a number of things, but basically when the air is very dry, you are going to have static electricity. So the electricity is going to be easy. It is going to be easier to conduct from one object to another. Some people maybe who have pets like cats during the winter time, they know that if they try to pet them, they're going to see little sparks appearing on the fur. And that's the same thing. It's just because the air is so dry that the electricity can travel in the air in a much easier way than when it's when you have a humid day, for instance.
Cool. Since we have electricity in our body, can we power things that need electricity?
All right, so I have an answer, but I can power this light bulb, but that's with a little bit of help. So if I use this light bulb, this is powered with the electricity I have in my body, but it's a special lamp. It's a lamp that uses only a tiny bit of electricity. It's not the typical lamp that you have, the light bulb that you have at home. Those light bulbs require much more energy, more electricity.
Yeah, very cool. So whoever didn't see that lit up when Dr. Terrenoire touched it. I'm going to do one closing question because unfortunately we're almost out of time, but I'm going to pick the one from Anvi. Does anything control the brain? So we talked about how brain cells control a lot of our cells. Does anything control the brain?
I wouldn't use the word control. So as Camille mentioned, the brain, and as I said, the brain is the command center, and the brain is always receiving information from everywhere in your body and analyzing this information, and then decides what to do, if you have to react or do something. So the brain is going to make a decision based on the information that it's getting. So it's not being controlled by that, but is being influenced by it in a way.
Very cool. So I'll ask you, I guess, one more closing question. What is something that's very cool about being a scientist?
Well, so I think there are two things. One is that we get to use those really cool instruments and see how, in a dish, what's happening in your body. I think that's really cool. The other thing is that Dan was talking about how at NYSCF we have people making cells from the eye to transplant them into the back of the patients who are losing their sight. And I work in that team. So it's a very, very exciting work to do, because it's thinking that what I'm making in a dish like this is going to go one day in a person's eye to help them recover their sight. I think it's one of the coolest thing ever.
I think it's very cool. And I think a lot of people are very excited by what you're doing because it's going to help them be able to see again. So thank you, Cecile and Dan and Camille, everyone that tuned in. We hope you enjoyed joining us today. And we hope to have more of these in the future. So be on the lookout and we hope to see you there. And everyone have a great afternoon and day. Bye, everybody.